was guided by humans in his revelations. As in Surah 2:228, when a man and a woman are going to get divorced, there's a period of time, 3 months effectively, where the man and the woman aren't allowed to have sex. And during that time, if she's pregnant, she's got to tell the husband. So then after the 3 months, when we've determined she's not pregnant, she can then go on and marry another man. And what the verse says is that she must wait for 3 menstrual cycles. Now in another verse, 65:4, if you read the circumstances of Revelation, there's hadiths explaining how this verse came about. What happened is there were some women in Medina who were saying, that verse that Muhammad has given us doesn't cover all the women. It doesn't cover women who don't have menstrual cycles. So young girls who haven't started the menstrual cycles aren't covered. Postmenopausal women aren't covered, and pregnant women aren't covered. So they told this guy, and then this guy went to Muhammad and said, "Oh Muhammad, that verse you gave us doesn't cover all of the women." Now this was Allah's perfect time to show how all-knowing he was and say, I know which verse you're going to say. It's the one about the menstrual cycles, and here is another verse that fixes it. But that's not what happened. Muhammad said, look, which verse? And the man told him. And then even at that point, Muhammad had to ask him, and which women does it not cover? And the man had to say, too young, postmenopausal, and pregnant. And then Muhammad said, and for those who have ended their periods, and for those who do not have them, the period of waiting is 3 calendar months, and the pregnant woman until she gives birth. I mean, there's so many points in the Quran where someone came to Muhammad and said, Muhammad, there's something wrong with this. And he said, hang on a minute, I'll just fix it. And then out comes a new verse.
Yeah, there are a lot of those that describe, just current affairs and Muhammad's current tactical standpoint. And I just wonder how that isn't more obvious to the few people who believe it and have actually read it. That doesn't seem at all suspicious to them that you have, I understand that, not all Muslims are going to say that, Muhammad became, anywhere near omniscient just because he had contact with an angel. But still, you'd think that if he was being fed information from an angel and he was supposed to, he'd see farther than the next corner. And so many of these things about his personal enemies. There's verses. There's verses in there say, well, you can't marry Muhammad's widows. Now, those are still in there well over 1,000 years after both he and all of his widows are dead. I would say that it's not particularly relevant. But, I think of Frank Herbert's book Dune, where he had the Fremen or Fremen. They were kind of based on Arabic culture, and they're on other planets and so forth. And I thought, can you imagine thousands of years from now, as people of different faiths are colonizing other planets, okay, and they're still, they're thousands of light years or what have you away, and they're still reading this verse saying that this man who's been dead for millennia, you can't marry his widows. What's the possible relevance?
One of my favourite things as I was reading the Quran, because as I read it, I really pictured the scene, and there's 2 verses. He literally says something, realises he's fucked up, and then he corrects it in the next verse. And in the one verse, he says something like, I'm going to paraphrase it. In the first verse, he says, us Muslims, we're really hard, we are. We can kick anyone's ass. If there's 20 of us, we'd kill 200 of the unbelievers. And if there's 100 of us, we'll kill 1,000. And then in the next verse, what he must have done, I could imagine they were all sitting around the campfire, and they're all sitting there thinking, hang on, Allah just said that if we believe, then we can defeat the enemy at 10-1 odds. And they're sitting there and thought, shit, that means if ever I come up against an army at 10-1 odds, I've got to fight because Allah said, and if I don't, I'm not a true believer, I'll probably burn in hell. And then Muhammad's probably sitting there thinking, oh shit, He's looked at all these blokes with their jaws dropped open and thought, I'm going to get all my followers killed here. So the very next verse says, but Allah has eased your load because he can see there is doubt in you. So you only have to fight 2-to-1 odds.
Hey, I call that practical, personally. I think that's one of those things that we should include.
Oh, the implications, by the way, the verse that I mentioned earlier, verse 65:4, is it's specifically talking about the waiting period in a divorce with a woman who is too young to have started her periods. Now, in another verse, it says that if you haven't had sex with your wife, there is no waiting period because there's no way she can be pregnant. So in the Quran, in 65:4, it's actually saying not only can you marry a female that's too young to have started her periods, but you can actually have sex with her as well.
So while I stepped away, did you get onto your topic, Rash, about the Flat Earth video and the responses it was getting?
No, yeah, I did my Flat Earth video, Quran's Flat Earth, a while ago, and Dawa Films was threatening to completely humiliate me with the video response, and he has made. He's just so unbelievably poor. I mean, the thing he doesn't seem to realise is the main argument of my video was you've got an all-knowing entity that knows everything and it does not make mistakes. It's written a book that is absolutely perfect and is completely unaltered. So my argument is, if you look in that book, it should not have any hint whatsoever that it was written by a 7th century Arab. And because 7th century Arabs thought the earth was flat, there should be absolutely no hints in there of a flat earth. Because if there is something in there, for example, the Quran says that Allah spread out the earth. Now, to me, I read that and I think, oh, that's a flat earth. It was written by a man. I don't believe it. Now, someone will say, oh, it just means he made the earth big. Well, in which case you can improve the Quran by saying, and it is Allah who made the earth big. So therefore, if you can improve it, it's not perfect. And Dawa Films has come out with this video, and all he does is he looks and says, oh, well, not all of the exegesis on the Quran say that the earth is flat. Therefore, the Quran doesn't say the earth is flat. But he ignores the fact that the other exegesis explicitly say God spread out the earth, and then in brackets, i.e., he made it flat. And then even in the exegesis he quotes from, where it says spread out the earth means spread it out like a dinner table, you know, with pasture and trees and stuff. He ignores the text above it, which says, of course, we know that the earth was created before the heavens. It's just God spread it out after he finished making the heavens. It's a really, really bad reply. It's so bad I'm struggling to motivate myself to actually reply to it.
Yeah, he has a remarkable gift for missing the point. I mean, he opens up the entire thing by saying that he hopes in this video to refute the idea of ex-Muslims being authorities, and he's completely missed the point. You know, you made the argument you did, you showed the sources you did. It has nothing to do with the fact that being an ex-Muslim necessarily makes you correct on the issue or even any kind of an expert. It's just you have a unique perspective. That doesn't make you correct. And then, like I said, he goes into the comparative exegesis, and he basically comes up with this argument, well, the guy that I'm citing is more respected than all of the people that you're citing put together. His argument is, my scholar can beat up your scholar. And it completely goes over his head that the point is that people who studied their whole lives this material came to different conclusions. You know, I don't care, even if he's not just completely talking out of his ass when he says that this guy is more respected than this guy, it's not like Ibn Kathir is chopped liver in the mind of any one who studies this material. So the idea that this is some sort of a game of spades and he can just trump one scholar with the words of another, he's completely missing the point. People have studied, people close to the Prophet and then the generations after walked away with the impression that the earth was flat based on what they heard from him. And then once the input comes in from the astronomers of the Middle Ages, then you see these competing schools of exegesis where some say, I mean, some of these people who write the Tafsirs and other writings, it's just like the theistic scientific denialist arguments and their respective camps we see today. We see people who were completely unaware of the astronomer's point of view and just said, yeah, this is what the Quran says, end of story. And that was the impression that they came away with, is that it was describing a flat earth. Then you have people who are aware of what the astronomers say, and I think it was Ibn Kathir who said that the Quran says the earth is flat, and it is flat, unlike what some astronomers are telling us. So that's the denialist camp. That's the Nephilim-free side of the coin. He's aware of both arguments, and he's ready to deny the astronomers' arguments and evidence because the scripture says otherwise. And then last but not least, you have at the tail end of the opposite caliphate, and then in more modern times, you have people writing commentaries where they say, yes, but we're aware of both arguments, but they're somehow compatible, like people who believe in both creationism and evolution, or intelligent design and evolution, or like, I thought we'd go a whole show without mentioning him, but Together for Peace, how he says that he holds, a belief in both the Bible with an unspecified degree of literalism, and then also evolution at the same time. So, you have all these people with these different points of view, with a heavy leaning towards the belief in a flat Earth, and he just completely missed the point in his vid that why is there this divergence? Why didn't every single person who spoke with Muhammad about this matter have it clarified to them? Because I'm sure that people came up to him and asked, if you had a guy who could speak with angels, you'd bombard him with questions constantly, and he'd answer about every single subject that you could imagine. So, the fact that people with only a few degrees of separation away from Muhammad walked away with this understanding of there being a flat Earth just goes to show that he himself was likely under that impression, given the fact that they basically agreed with him on just about everything. I remember several of the hadith where it was just downright comical. The person narrating the hadith and Muhammad would be standing, and they'd be looking at something, and Muhammad would say, hey, do you know what this is? And the follower would say, well, God's prophet knows better than I. So in other words, he says, hey, do you know what that is over there? And he's like, it's whatever you say it is, Mr. Prophet, sir. So, obviously, he could have told them anything, and they would have at least paid lip service, if not actually believed it privately.
Well, he did tell them anything, didn't he? He'd say, do you know what shooting stars are? And they say, Allah and his apostle know best. And he'd say, well, whenever God is about to reveal a verse to mankind, it's passed down by the angels, and the jinn, these are these demons that are made of fire that look like normal humans, they'll all stand on top of each other to try to reach up to heaven so that they can listen to the revelation and then come and whisper it to soothsayers with lies mixed in. But as they climb up to the heavens to try to listen, a star will shoot fire at the devils to shoot them down. It's like he thought that stars were really close to the earth and shot fire at... these devils, they're supposed to be made of fire. So what's the fire going to do to them? They go, oh shit, that was hot. Oh, Concordance, you were showing a book that looked like...
I want to tell you guys the story. I give a class or two every year to the local university, one of the graduate classes on biology. And I commented, I had a nice back and forth with one of the students that, he was a good guy, was very nice to me. And I said something about his beard. I said, that's a very impressive beard. Obviously a Muslim beard. And so he pulled this out of his backpack. It's a brief illustrated guide to understanding Islam. What really I obsessed about, I remember PZ being confronted in Scotland, about the way that the Quran reveals human embryology in the various developmental stages. And of course, I don't speak Arabic, but some of the terms they use, I love the translations, like the aliqua, the leech, suspended thing, and blood clot. Then we made the mugha, which is a chewed-like substance. And there's this beautiful picture. Let me see if I can get this in here, of a piece of gum. And this piece of gum obviously reveals a privileged knowledge of, that's what the Quran is specifically describing. Now you can see how close that piece of gum matches the actual scientific drawing, right? So a chewed-like thing reveals that Muhammad was obviously inspired divinely, because how else would you have described the actual picture here shows a generic blob of flesh, right? I mean, that only looks like a piece of chewed gum. That's the only thing it could possibly have been.
Well, I see that all the time. I'll chew a bit of gum, I'll spit it out, and I'll, oh shit, a baby! And then I'll realize
Exactly right. I often get confused
bit
myself.
of gum, There's me thinking I'm about to tread on an embryo, but no, it's a Wrigley's. I've got a book as well, which is called, Keith Moore, who writes a series of books called The Developing Human. Now, Keith Moore is always the person that Muslims will quote when it talks about these embryology miracles. But what I want you to notice is this is a very special edition of The Developing Human. Can you see at the bottom, it says The Developing Human, Keith Moore, and then it says, with Islamic additions. Now, Keith Moore, who concluded at the end of his speech that some of the information in the Quran was not known until the 20th century, after we'd discovered it with microscopes. Therefore, Muhammad must have been told by him who knows everything, God, the creator of the universe. That's what Keith Moore said on his video talk. Now, I emailed Keith Moore, and I asked him a few questions, and one of them was, did you become a Muslim? And the answer was, no, I did not become a Muslim. Which is a bit of a strange thing, because if someone had given you conclusive proof that there is a man outside the door with a gun who's going to come and shoot you in the head, you would probably take aversive action to avoid getting shot in the head. So what Muslims are trying to claim is that Keith Moore proved scientifically that there is a man that's going to burn you when you die if you don't become a Muslim, yet decided he wouldn't become a Muslim despite knowing that it was true. But this book, not only did Keith Moore not become a Muslim, which shows that he had no conviction in the words he said in that video, but also his Developing Human book, this was the special issue which came out with Islamic editions, which you can't get anywhere. You have to order it from the UAE. I ordered this from the United Arab Emirates directly, and it was really difficult to get hold of. And what they've done is they've taken his standard book, and then they've thrown in every other page, they've thrown in additional Arabic stuff. And I'm like, oh, this hadith sounds a little bit like it's talking about this. And it's basically a special edition for people who live in Arabic countries, convincing them that Keith Moore really believed that Allah wrote the Quran. But the really entertaining thing in it is, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it on the screen or not, is there's a page of acknowledgements, and can you see number 6? Is number 6 on screen?
It's out of focus.
Yeah, it's out of focus for me.
Right.
Pretty bad.
Well,
Dr. Abdullah Al-Turki?
No, number 6, Sheikh Osama bin Laden.
As one of the donors.
Yep. So you ask yourself, what capacity did Sheikh Osama bin Laden, the multi-millionaire, what part did he play in the development of this book that Keith Moore says is the Quran is the work of God? I wonder what kind of an incentive he made for Keith Moore to say those things. I've been racking my brains, but I just can't think of anything.
I think he picked out the font and designed the cover, which was quite lovely.
Chew the gum.
What?
They probably got him to chew the gum for the photo.
You
You chew this gum for us.
The image of the jinn, the little devils stacking up on top of each other, forming these human ladders, and then the shooting stars knocking them down to prevent them from stealing secrets or whatever from heaven. That would make a great. I immediately thought of like a flash game for cellular phones and handheld devices. It could be the next Angry Birds. Anyone wants to call in and talk with us, send a Skype contact request to Magic Sandwich Show. We have one of our regulars, Oliver, who has yet another identity, but he has his picture up there. So he's going to talk to us about meat eating and atheism, I believe. Oliver, welcome.
Thank you.
Why, hi Oliver, how you doing, man?
Having some problems with Log TV. I'm fuming.
You may for Keith more to say though.
Oh, wow.
Whilst you're dealing with those problems, Oliver, I can just say I've looked at some of the comments that are coming up on the Blog TV show. For some, it does seem to be coming across slowly, and it certainly is for me. Other people are saying it's fine. The one thing I will say is that it is being recorded separately, apart from Blog, and as with most of the previous programs, it will be posted hopefully within the next couple of days on the YouTube channel, The Magic Sandwich Show. So if you're having any problems seeing it now, it will be there. Hopefully, as I say, it normally takes a couple of days to get it up. And I'd also quickly like to say that the charity show, because of the technical problems, well, I think we only got about 17 or 18 hours, I think, of the 24. But they are also being posted onto the Magic Sandwich Show YouTube channel. So if you didn't see any of the charity event, most of it is already posted. I think there are a few hours left, and once that's done, I'll do a video and put them into a playlist. Okay, sorry, back to Oliver.
Are you there?
How's it going?
What do you got for us?
Okay, so I wanted to talk about the subject of eating meat. The theist would turn to the Bible, or like more specifically, the Christian would turn to the Bible and cite that God ordains us to have dominion over the flock and the animals. Now, and also the other thing is we don't believe in souls, so we don't have that sort of divinity over the other animals. We do have a higher intelligence, but nevertheless, certain animals which are reared on farms, while they don't have the capacity for language, they certainly have the capacity to suffer and feel pain. And we shed them in, we constrain them in shitty circumstances for their entire lives before slaughtering them, all just for the sake of eating meat. So I've kind of made a presumption that everyone here does eat meat. If not, then please do correct me. But what would be your thoughts on justifying eating meat, being that you don't believe you have a soul to put yourself up higher than the animals?
Well, I don't eat meat, but I do think well, not everyone else, but I think some other people should eat meat, because if they didn't, the human race tends to have this approach of only looking after things that have got a use, and as soon as animals stop having a use, we're not going to have acres and acres of pasture land for cows to stand around eating grass all day. We're going to build McDonald's on it, but vegetarian McDonald's. So all these cows, what's going to end up happening to them is they'll all get killed. And really, if you think about it, there's probably only so many cows in the world because people milk them and eat them.
I really apologize, Atheismo.
Wait, no, that's that's atheism info that was in the comment section.
Sorry about that.
I actually do eat meat and don't anticipate becoming a vegetarian in the future. To be honest, I just the issue of the soul notwithstanding, I don't feel the degree of compassion that vegetarians do towards cows and chickens, and I don't anticipate that that's going to happen. I think that if there's ever going to be a compromise, it would be cultured meat, what they call schmeat, which is just meat without the animal. It's just grown and monitored. I don't know when, if ever, it'll become more cost effective, but that would at least sidestep their concerns of their
when
meat.
When that happens, are you willing to try human meat?
Well, who says I haven't already eaten human meat?
What, are you a Satanist or something then?
No, survivalist. It's a long story. Anyway, I wouldn't. I don't know. The thing about eating human meat is I can understand some people say, well, it's disrespectful to the remains, depending, But I wouldn't care if somebody, ate me after I was dead. I'm done using the body. It's gone. And as like if you had to survive, and you had the only thing you had to eat was human flesh, I don't really see the big deal about it. And that's the interesting thing is, on the one hand, you have vegetarians who, of course, will take issue with a religious doctrine that says that meat is allowed under these circumstances where they think that they have these reservations about it. And on the other hand, you have certain kinds of meat or food that are perfectly safe, but are forbidden by certain traditions. Like, most obviously, the flesh of a pig. It's forbidden in 2 of the 3 Abrahamic religions. Christians just do a doublethink out of it, as though Jesus died on the cross and now it's okay to have bacon. I don't know. I guess that's their reasoning. What can you do? But I've heard Jews and Muslims say, like if you say that, well, pigs are relatively clean animals, they'll say, yeah, but their meat is unclean. And you think, well, in what sense? If it's safe, if you're not going to get any, does God just hate cholesterol that much? What is his reservation? Why does he say eat some animals and not others?
If I can throw in my own 2 cents, I would object to torturing an animal before eating it. I would have a definite problem knowing that my animal suffered deeply in order for me to have that meat. But if the animal is killed, what I think is humanely, let's say a cow that experiences a minimum of discomfort, and then has a moment and then is dead, I don't see that as the moral equivalent of harming something with, say, ambition or a sense of purpose in their life. And there's such a gray area in the morality of eating meat. And I went for a period of time where I was a vegetarian for ethical reasons. And in the end, it was a practical consideration. When you have a family and, it's very hard to get a balanced nutrition both for the ethical and the environmental and the other reasons.
Well, my view is, sorry, so
I was just going to say before you carry on is that the problem is in the UK you don't know whether the meat you're eating was ritually slaughtered or not, because there's currently no law that says that it must be labelled as ritually slaughtered meat. And I think that there was some attempt to have a law passed to make it mandatory, but it was overturned because it was decided that it would be an unfair disadvantage to ritual slaughterhouses because no one would buy the meat.
Yeah, my view is that we should fully exploit what I suspect will be a brief delusionary appearance to be at the top of the evolutionary tree by actually extending our abuse of animals to include or decriminalizing bestiality. I mean, why should we treat animals with respect? I mean, when Concordance was on the show, he was on the charity show, he was showing us scorpions, and these scorpions bite his children. Dogs bite people. Why should we treat these things with respect? So I'm all for total abuse of animals.
Sorry to cut you off, but that was so stupid. Because of the actions of some animals, we should have no respect for every animal. So benign animals like cows, we should have no respect for.
Absolutely. Or jellyfish.
They started it. You got trolled all over.
Yes.
Oh boy, that was a long time. That was a long time coming for DPR.
Oh, well,
that is a good point, though. That nature is not. Nature itself is not filled with vegetarians, right?
Nature is fucking horrific.
And so, there are certain reasons why meat eating is going to be very hard to ever get rid of. And part of that is there's always going to be a part of you that will feel connected to the idea of, a nutrient dense piece of meat.
Do we actually eat any carnivores?
I think as delicacies in some places they're available, but not
Pretty rare.
typically.
Yeah, I mean, in
If it
Asia,
is,
they
then
eat
it's
bugs.
got the argument, well, they eat meat, so they shouldn't complain if we eat their meat.
A
But
lot of
I was trying to think of any carnivores that we actually eat.
Yeah,
A
if
lot
you go
of-
if
but
you go
we-
to an Indian takeaway in the UK, quite often you're allegedly eating cat, and you don't know it, and cats eat mice. So yeah, I think we do eat carnivores.
Well, but I mean, there are some animals that can only digest meat, so I don't think it would work there. We do have a choice in our diet, even though the healthiest thing to do is to include a variety.
And
But,
you can't get protein from corn and tofu and
It's-
falafel.
well, here's the problem I have with that is people say protein, but there's a wide variety of different proteins. I don't believe it's the same protein.
Well, there's also the question of density. What is the nutrient density of this food? Now, there's a lot of wastage involved in the process of creating, edible meat for us. We waste a lot of calories, but at the same time, we concentrate a lot of things. Sometimes bad things. Sometimes it's things like pesticides get concentrated the further up the food chain we go. But we also are concentrating things like, nitrogen-rich resource. So there's, a real advantage to not having to eat as much in order to get the nutrients we need.
On a serious note, though, I would like to say that I think that we do have a responsibility, and I would certainly, as Concordant said, I would not like to think of animals being tortured. I certainly wouldn't want to think of them being suffering. It's bad enough that we end up killing them. I think we got a responsibility to make sure their lives are not too horrific, which is why whilst I do eat meat, I will, as best I can, buy sort of like free-range chicken and so far as you can identify it, meat from animals that have been given a reasonable life before we kill them and chop them up.
And that, on a related note, someday, very soon, hopefully, I'm going to put together a video on animal research, which is an extremely hot topic. I think we're going to have some really divided views on it. But I am actually opposed to certain types of animal research that I think needlessly, and that is a relative term, but I don't think the research objectives match the amount of discomfort, pain, and suffering that the animals experience. And I think that it's not a black and white issue. There are types of experiments that I think we could move away from, and others that we can't do without. And that kind of a necessity, we can choose to do away with all animal research, but there's going to be a cost, and that cost will be a human cost in suffering. And honestly, and I know this is not a very enlightened view, but given the choice between me and a lab mouse, screw the lab mouse. I want humans more than animals, other animals, to experience less pain and suffering. It's my loyalty to my species.
Yeah, give me a choice
Yeah,
between my kid dying and some animals, and I'd say, give me a truncheon and a bag, and I'll go and fetch you some rabbits. There was
Yeah,
a
where the
sketch on.
seals at?
There was a sketch on Family Guy that I liked where there's a rabbit and they put a gun to the rabbit's head and blow the rabbit's head off, and then they say, "This lipstick isn't bulletproof. We know that now."
Yeah, that's the other thing I have to really watch. I mean, it's around anyone who has a cause, I immediately am tempted to make jokes. But I mean, vegetarians and vegans can be very, very passionate and sensitive about it. So you have to be careful.
You do, and I think it's when they put the rights of an animal above those of a human. That is ludicrous.
And when I say you have to be careful, of course, you don't have to be careful. It's just something you need to take into consideration that you don't burn a bridge with someone. But yeah, I mean, the jokes just start writing themselves, right or wrong, once we get on this issue. But I guess people are more concerned with the vegetarian versus meat eating, and no one seems particularly interested in the subtopic I tried to bring up about the foods forbidden by religion, which is what I've always found kind of interesting. If something's perfectly safe. I mean, has anyone seen that movie?
Listen to Qualifying X. One of the reasons that this happened was because God, being all-knowing, protected humans from eating pork because we didn't know how to cook it properly in those days. So he told us not to eat it. He didn't tell us how we could eat it. I don't, for some reason, it doesn't make sense. You'll have to take it up with Venom.
Yeah, well, then he goes to the opposite. The Bible itself goes to the opposite extreme. There's this verse where a guy's having a vision, and he's out in the wilderness, and there's all these animals that he's forbidden to eat by the Old Testament, and the Spirit speaks up and says, "Eat," and he says, "Well, I can't eat. These things are forbidden." And he says, "Well," or he says, "These things are unclean." And the voice says, "Well, how can anything that God has created be unclean?" And I thought, well, now you're going to the opposite extreme and are giving people a justification to eat anything, a lot of these things genuinely are poisonous or dangerous.
Well, it's even worse in Islam, because a camel is clean to eat unless a rock hits it on the head, and then it's unclean. So if a camel falls off a cliff and knocks itself unconscious and dies of brain damage, then the camel is unclean because it was banged on the head, which is why around my area where there's an Islamic radio station constantly getting adverts for a restaurant, and these restaurants, they're always promoting with 100% unstunned halal meat.
Yeah, that's bizarre. I mean, what was that movie? Was it Scott Pilgrim versus the World, where there's this guy who he's a vegan and he has these superpowers, and the moment he accidentally drinks this coffee with milk in it, he loses his powers. I don't know if they think that it's that drastic. I mean, I guess it makes you ceremonially unclean, and you have to go through certain ablutions to overcome it. But it seems bizarre how finicky. I mean, the thing is, I wonder, is, like, for example, Minecraft not popular with Muslims because for the longest time pigs were the only animals that dropped any meat. So if you put them in that world, they would all just starve to death. What were they going to do? Eat leather from cows before the 1.8 update? I don't know what they would have done. But I think that, I mean, for example, there is the stipulation in the Quran. I believe it says that if a Muslim is in danger of starvation, then they can break the rules. They can. Isn't that right, Rash? I mean, if I'm remembering correctly, you can eat if the alternatives.
Just before you move on from that, I'm not familiar with that particular film, but it just reminded me, before I forget, there was the film, I think it's Alive, wasn't it? Where a plane crashes. Was it somewhere in the Andes? And it's based on a true story. The survivors had nothing to eat, and eventually did end up eating parts of the deceased passengers. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah,
that's a good film. I wanted to show my kids that film, but my wife said
I think there was a sort of when they were rescued, there was a sort of mild outcry, but I don't think that there were any serious repercussions for any of the people that actually did it, were there?
Well, the thing is, I really wouldn't have any issue with that at all. The weird thing is when I ate meat, the idea of that meat was an animal repulsed me, and I could never have eaten a human to stay alive. But oddly enough, when I became a vegetarian, after a number of years, I accepted that meat is animals, and that if I was stuck somewhere and I needed to live, I would kill an animal without any problems at all. And if I was stuck up in the Andes with lots of frozen dead people in the snow, then I wouldn't mind eating their bums. If that's the only way to stay alive, that's fine. It doesn't bother me at all.
Why did you go immediately to the bums? I mean, there's all sorts of other cuts
I thought that was an odd choice as well.
No, you have to start at I'd start on the women's bums. I'd eat the women first, and it'd be the bums I'd start on. I wouldn't eat their boobs.
I'd start with the babies, because I'm an atheist.
Well, it's a good cut of meat on most other animals. But, it's weird. You hear about situations throughout history of people resorting to cannibalism, and honestly, a lot of the times when I read those accounts, I wonder why they didn't resort to it sooner. Because it seems like people have to be on the absolute verge of death before they'll resort to cannibalism in these desperate situations, and some of them even then won't. And I thought, I know that there's an issue of respect for the deceased, but why come that close to dying yourself? When I mean, honestly, like if you're back in the day and some enemy is laying siege to the walls of your city and people are dying and food is running short, I would put forward the suggestion that you start stockpiling the fallen bodies as a potential source of food right from the get-go, as long as they could be stored in a way that disease wasn't an issue. Because once they're turned off, once they're switched off, and the sentience is gone, there's some ceremony that people can stand on. But for the most part, it's just matter now. It's just flesh.
I would struggle to watch people eat my children, though, I must admit.
And there are some health consequences of cannibalism. Kuru is one of the many. If you've ever seen, what were some of the movies where if they're checking for cannibalism, they have the person hold out their hand to see if they have the shakes, right? Because Kuru can cause you to have, it's a prion disease. It can cause you to have neurodegeneration. So it's a fairly realistic risk, although rare. And then you've got all sorts of other things. Humans are coated with all sorts of pathogens. If we're talking about fresh butchered meat, it might be safe, but long term, you'd really be running a lot of risks.
The handshaking, that I always thought that was just a science fiction plot device, but that's a real infectious disease.
Yeah, it's rare. It's pretty rare.
But okay, now people walk around with it, and it's somehow only transmitted when you eat humans, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a prion, so it's a protein-based disease. You basically have to ingest uncooked, probably neural tissue of any kind would do it. I don't know that much about Kuru. It's just one of those rare exceptions that they mostly have isolated from Papua New Guinea area where they have cannibalism in recent past.
I wonder, are some of the forms they experience local to them? Because I always thought that was something that people just made up. But I guess in general, in terms of the potential infectious diseases, humans are probably one of the worst things you could eat that wasn't outright poisonous, because we can communicate the most diseases to one another compared to any other creature. For example, I remember there was this someone claimed they had a scientific miracle from the Hadiths, and it was if a bowl or some other dish got licked by a dog, you were supposed to wash it with dust and no water, just scrub it with dust in order to kill whatever it was that the dog had put on it. And,
wait, what is up with Muhammad and his hatred of canines? I mean, this guy obviously was bitten as a child or something.
Well, but the thing is, maybe you can speak to this, Concordance. If you had two bowls, one of which had been covered in dust, and the other had been licked by a dog, wouldn't the one licked by a dog be much safer?
No, probably not. I mean, the whole thing is that the bacteria that cause trouble are the ones that like to live in warm-blooded creatures, right? Stuff in the soil can be bad because it secretes toxins, but usually if it's living in the soil, it likes room temperature and not body temperature.
Well, but there's a wide variety of bacilli that live in ordinary dust, right? But I thought that there were relatively few diseases that communicated between dog and human being.
I wouldn't really say that's true. I mean, I think in practical terms, no, I think you could absolutely get very sick from dog-transmitted bacteria. I just don't think it happens very often because they're around humans so much.
Yeah, I'm amazed that there
The scientific miracle of the Hadiths. Muhammad was a messenger of God. There's just one thing for us all to do now.
Well, I remember that there was this one, I think it's a hadith, and it says that an angel won't visit a house that has a dog in it. And I think, well, that's sensible, because you wouldn't want the angel to get ringworm.
Really, though, Muhammad, I mean, the Quran is so anti-dog. I'm surprised there are any left alive.
Well, to be fair, it's mostly the hadiths that are anti-dog. I mean, the hadiths are such a goldmine of weird, off-the-wall stuff. I mean, the Quran itself is tame in comparison. And what's funny is I was talking earlier about how I would always read more of my opponent's literature than literature produced by people of my own point of view. And the hadiths, there's one giant bluff by apologists and people and Muslims who argue in defense of their faith is, they'll say, well, you don't know anything about my religion until you've read the Quran. And then you say, well, okay, I read the Quran. They're like, oh, well, you still have to read the hadiths. And then you read the hadiths, and it's a complete fool's errand. It's a waste of time because they'll say, oh, damn, you actually read them? I didn't think you would. Okay, none of them count. It's all about the Quran. Don't bring up the hadiths. I mean, the hadiths have so much weird stuff in them, and you can cite a lot of them to an apologist and just have you feel like one of those cowboys shooting at the feet of someone and making them dance like in a western like Yosemite Sam. It's just there's so much bizarre stuff. I mean, the Sahih al-Bukhari, which is one of the earliest and most respected collections, I've never laughed so loud at a book since I read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as when I read these hadith collections. I mean, they really, when they say, oh yeah, you have to read the hadiths, they really are banking on you not reading them because they are just hilarious.
A Muslim proselytizer in the city centre was talking to me once, and I wanted to, judge what kind of a Muslim believer he was, whether Quran only or Quran and hadiths, and I asked him about the hadiths, and he said, yeah, I believe in them. I said, what, all of them? He said, yes. I said, so you believe that if you're sleeping in the morning because you didn't hear the call to morning prayer, it's because Satan has urinated in your ear? And he said, yes, I do believe that.
Which one was that from? That's not...
And then, and I said, and do you also believe that that once a naughty stone stole Moses' clothes? He said, yeah, I believe that as well. How the hell can you believe that a stone went out and stole someone's clothes?
I had some commenters on an old video of mine that it's there are no theists in hospital waiting rooms, and it's about faith, the belief in faith healing and the damage that it's done, the scriptural basis for it in the Bible. And I'm if you guys will forgive me just a second, James 5:14, is any among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will also be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other that you may be healed. And that, to me, is pretty specific, don't you think? I mean, doesn't that pretty strongly support the idea? And yet, you will get, 9 Christians out of 10 who will tell you that, the Bible has nothing in it, in favor of faith healing or against doctors. It, doesn't tell you what to do. Well, of course it does. It just that people manage to reinterpret this as some sort of a more generic, allegorical, right? Allegories are such a powerful tool because anything that's inconvenient in there, you can just take out by calling it an allegory or some sort of an object lesson. Or it's not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturers of cheese products.
Well, okay, now, concordance, how do people with modern medicine deal with leprosy? Are you familiar?
It's not called leprosy anymore. That's one way we've dealt with it. They have antibiotics they keep them on, but it's called Jacob's disease now.
Okay, so, but I mean, are these relatively simple, cheap antibiotics? So it is just at the end of the day an infectious, is it like a bacilli or something like that?
Yeah, it's just very hard to get rid of because it's deep in the tissues.
Okay, but a steady regimen of the antibiotics will kill them. Are they over-the-counter antibiotics or antibiotics of similar strength, or are they particularly special?
Yeah, that's out of my knowledge base.
Yeah, because if it's bacterial and it can be killed by antibiotics, then there's probably like some, all-purpose infectious disease fighting strategies you could use against it. It reminds me of the South Park where someone gets really sick with, I think, SARS, and he says, well, here is the cure as passed down by your white middle-class ancestors. Some Pepto-Bismol, some antibiotics, and a Sprite. and then he feels right as rain after he has, chicken soup was one of them. Just makes me wonder, you know, for example, the Bible is very specific. It says, okay, someone has leprosy, you leave them alone until it looks like they've gotten over it, and then you do this ritual, which, depending on how you read it, either is supposed to finally cure it, or it's just a ritual to demonstrate. I don't know what. But anyway, you take two birds, you split one open, you pour the blood out, you take the second bird, you roll it around in the blood of the first, and then use the still living bird covered in the blood of the first bird as an applicator to cover select parts of the person's body, and then the priest declares him clean. And then that's it. You know, no more.
Yeah. Two quick corrections. Sorry, it's Hansen's disease, not Jacob's disease. I was still thinking about Kuru. And the other thing is, I was wrong. It isn't antibiotics. It is actually. I'm reading here from a recent scientific paper. You kill a chicken and you roll a second chicken in the blood. That's in Nature 2007. So that's the current therapy.
Well, it just shows what the Bible knows. I mean, the Bible has you rolling like small birds around in the other bird's blood, but you need a whole chicken. I mean, it goes to show how far we've come.
Yeah, it's a miracle of the Bible.
Is there anything in science about ajwa dates? Because there's a hadith that says, he who eats 7 ajwa dates every morning will not be affected by poison or magic on the day that he eats them. Now, I can understand how an ajwa date can stop you from being affected by magic, but it's the poison I'm struggling with.
Yeah, gotta watch out for that magic. So anyway, if you want to call in and talk, join the panel, send a contact request to Magic Sandwich Show on Skype. Please don't call into the show or you'll be blocked. Just send the contact request and a brief message about what you want to talk about. Anyway, back to the dust versus dogs. I mean, the claim from these hadiths that they said was some sort of a miraculous knowledge was that they said that dust had an enzyme in it that killed germs created, or not. Yeah, this isn't what the hadiths say. This is these are the modern apologists. They say that some researcher, and they don't say who or where or how, some researcher found an enzyme developed that occurs in dust, and they don't specify what kind of dust, that will kill germs created by dog saliva, or that is contained in dog saliva. Now that, on the surface, as a lay person in these issues, it sounds like complete hogwash, which would probably be cleaner than the dust. But how are enzymes going to occur in dust? I thought dust was insect feces and mold.
I guess there could be soil bacteria that secrete something to inhibit the growth of other bacteria. But, the power of dust is it eats up the moisture that might be present. So if you get something that's really dry, you're not going to get bacterial growth. Usually water is an absolute requirement for bacteria to create new bacteria. It's, major component in new cells. So, if you can scour something with moisture-free dust, literally dust, it's a miracle. It's a miracle of the Quran that someone would know that a dry substance is less likely to grow bacteria than a wet substance. You take Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid is far more likely to grow bacteria than peanut butter, right? You put the two of them side by side. Peanut butter is less likely to grow bacteria or spoil because the bacteria can't find any water or very little water to grow on the surface of that peanut butter.
I think that, I don't remember the exact source of it, but I seem to remember that because a Muslim, before he prays, has got to be clean. So if he's had sex with his wife, then he's got to be clean before he prays. And if there is no water for him to wash with, then he's got to wash himself with dirt from the ground. So there was a miracle claim that I saw where these people were saying that analysing women's urine showed that it's got more germs in it than male urine. So therefore, this is a miracle because women truly are obviously much dirtier than dirt off the ground.
Wow, when you put it like that, I mean, it's bad enough in Al-Tabari, there's that quote of him saying that women should be treated like domestic animals, but women are worse than dirt. That's pretty bad. Talking about the ablutions before a prayer. I couldn't believe, like I said, Bukhari has rules about farting. It has rules. It says if you go through all of your ritual cleansing before you go to pray, and then you fart, you have to go back and do it all again. And then they actually here's to show just how much his followers, like I said, kept badgering Muhammad with all these questions, because they actually said, okay, well, wait, you said some sort of and I forget what the term was they used. They say, well, what do you mean? And he says, the passing of wind from the anus. That's what he says, flat out. I mean, that's how specific and strict he had to be. He had to explain to him without any euphemism at all, because they just wanted to be as precise as possible. And wouldn't that always be the case? Anytime you have, you have any famous personality, people badger them with questions, even really dumb questions about minor details. I imagine a lot of us have seen what was it, Monty Python's Life of Brian, where everything he says, they blow it out of proportion. You know, he makes he drops his shoe, and they say, "Oh well, this will be a shoe-based religion. Give me your shoes," and so forth. It's pretty funny because, like I said, with Muslim apologists, I find that first they'll say, "Okay, we have to read the Quran." Then they say, "Oh well, you have to read the Hadiths too." And the moment you read them, they start to discount them and down. And many Muslims are will downplay the Hadiths as a whole, as they're aware of more and more people reading them, or selectively just say, well, that one's inauthentic, and you'll say, well, why? Is there a problem with the chain of narrators? And they say, no, it's basically they think it's authentic because it's silly or it's embarrassing or they don't want to defend it. But I think that whether you're a believer or a non-believer, the Hadiths serve a very important purpose, because for example, like I said, I'll get into discussions with Muslims about this, and they'll say, well, the Quran always wins against the Hadiths, so there. And I'm like, well, that's not the point. The point isn't to find a Hadith that trumps a verse in the Quran. The point is the Quran is a finite book, and obviously, there's a lot of room for things that could be clarified and a lot of ground not covered. So if you liken the Quran itself to a textbook in a classroom, and then the Hadith collections as an after class Q&A session, which is really what most of them amount to, is people coming up and badgering Muhammad, saying, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And he answers a lot of their questions along with other stories and anecdotes. But, I don't understand how, people could think that you could have someone who you believe has a line of communication open with the divine, and he says he's the last one that there will ever be. I mean, it must have been a nightmare. When you put it, I feel a little bit sorry for the guy, and now that I think of it that way. I mean, people must have been badgering him with stupid questions all the time.
Well, they were, and he revealed a verse in the Quran that told them to stop doing it. The people were coming into him and saying, Muhammad, what's the answer to this? Muhammad, where is my camel? It went missing. Tell me where my camel is. And then someone come and said, Muhammad, who is my father? And then Muhammad said in one of the verses something like, do not ask questions which the answers may cause you trouble. And that was his reply. So basically he was saying, stop asking me questions because you might not like the answer. So when people look in the Quran and see the verse that says, don't ask questions where the answer might give you trouble, and they think that the Quran is telling people, don't think about your religion because you might lose faith, what it's actually saying is, could you please stop asking me who your dad is and where your camel went?
I noticed the time, and we're getting close to the hour. There's just a few things I'd certainly like to say before we go. Actually, a question for you, Rationalizer. When P.C. Myers was accosted, it was actually at Dublin Concordance, it wasn't in Scotland, by Hamza and his sidekick.
Same thing, though.
His sidekick referred to the book that you've mentioned, referred to a page, and when you said that they've inserted pages, is it like one page of the original book and then they've added a page?
Yes, your assumption is correct.
I don't know. I just love that they are essentially, the group is essentially citing themselves.
Thank you.
Okay. I think we're going to skip the afterword because I think people in the chat are ready to scuttle off and go watch the Atheist Experience stream. So we'll just stop it there. Thanks everyone for coming. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We'll see you next time.
Ma salama.
Wait, did you throw in Klaatu Verata Nikto?